I've heard that it's been a terrific day, and I'm not at all surprised. Well, let me just say a couple of sort of dean-like things about all of that, which is how pleased and proud we are to be collaborating with our friends at Sidley for this inaugural Sidley Austin Forum as part of sort of the culmination of this year's fall legislative and regulatory process clinic that we run each fall, of course, down here in Washington, D.C. I, as ever, am very grateful to Sally Katzen and to Bob Bauer for their leadership of the clinic. I think it is by far and away the best Washington program in legal education. Nate, you can tell our former colleagues at Columbia and your current ones at Stanford I said that. But I think this addition, this collaboration with Sidley Austin that enables us to put together an incredibly timely program such as this with real deep expertise across law, policy, politics, and related domains is really something special, something I'm very excited about, and I'm looking forward to future iterations of it going forward as well. I want to thank in particular our alum John Kuster for his great leadership on the Sidley side in making this possible. And now I want to introduce our final speaker of the day, Frederick Yang. Fred is a partner with Garin Hart Yang Research Group and a senior vice president with the Hart Research Associates, a parent company of the research group. He is really one of the leading political pollsters and analysts in the country. And so if one wants to try and understand what happened, and I will count myself among those still wondering, there seems no better place to turn. He has worked for a number of candidates in the Senate, in the House, governors, other statewide office holders, really has proved himself to be uniquely skilled in that domain, and we're very thrilled to have him with us. And so without further ado, I'll turn things over to Fred Yang. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and to help walk all of us through what happened on November 8th and what it means going forward. If I'm a little distracted, I apologize. The only other thing that would be more important to me than talking about this is my daughter's middle school basketball game. They're playing right now. I am as a pollster, I'm the unofficial statistician for the team. And when I told them I wasn't going to be there today because I was doing this, they said, "Oh yeah, you're the guy who said Hillary Clinton would win. Maybe we'll get someone else to do our stats from now on." All right, so a couple things, and then I would urge all of you, when the mood strikes, if you have questions. I think a way I look at this at a couple things. So I think, number one, I come here not to praise polling per se, but also not to condemn public polling. The national polls, for the most part, got the numbers almost right. At the end of the day, Mrs. Clinton will win the popular vote by 2 points. An aggregation of all the publicly released polls nationally, the last 10 before the November 8th election, had the average Clinton margin of 3.4%. Number two, those same polls had the average for Johnson-Stein at 7%. They ended up getting 4.2% in real life. Then the third factor, that it was part of life in polling, is that the national polls, even the ones at the end, had an average undecided of 5%. Now, that is the one advantage that an actual election has over polls, is when you go to the polling booth or when you fill out your ballot at home, you have two options: voting for one of the candidates or not voting in that race. In polls, because of the nature of polls, we offer the undecided option. So whereas on election day, right, in the vote for president, there was no undecided, there was 5% average undecided in the national polls, which if you take that plus the 3% or more that Johnson-Stein got on election day, added to the volatility of the national polls. And in particular, if you take it one level down, because obviously we don't elect presidents by the popular vote, they're elected by electoral college. If you if you think about those dynamics in the national polls, they were even more prevalent in the battleground polls, especially in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Bottom line, there was a lot of volatility. I think number two, when you look in particular at the 3 states where the presidential campaign was basically won, or if you're on the other side, lost, of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, in addition to the volatility in public opinion research, there was volatility in real life. One statistic of the many statistics I've tried to remember is in the exit polls in the state of Wisconsin, 10% of voters who were surveyed in the exit polls said they had made up their minds on who to vote for president in the last couple days of the election. So the last couple days of the election could have been Tuesday, could have been Monday, could have been Sunday, could have been Saturday. You all know the days of the week. The second Comey letter hit on Friday afternoon. So in the state of Wisconsin, among the 10% who said they voted in the last couple days of the election, I would wager that most of those people were after the second Comey letter. Trump was ahead of Clinton by 27 points. So, one of the unstated questions I'm answering is what happened with the polling. What happened with the polling is the margin of error, the undecided, the fact that Johnson Stein got 7%, they got 4% in real life. So A is the normal volatility in a public opinion survey, and B is the volatility and fluidity in real life. And look, I just want to say we would be having a slightly different conversation, regardless of what party you were for, if 52,000 or so votes had switched between Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Mrs. Clinton lost those 3 states by roughly 106,000 votes total. So if 53,000 had changed hands, maybe we would be talking about how close the election was, but an election that she would have been ahead. Couple other things about how to read what happened on Election Day. I will argue that analysts, and I think analysts from both parties, will spend time going through the numbers and the results, because I really believe that what happened on November 8th isn't something that was short term. It didn't happen the last 3 or 4 days, didn't happen since September, didn't happen in 2016. Arguably, a lot of what happened or didn't happen on November 8th, 2016 are a result of long-term trends. Our NBC News, I'm part of the polling team for NBC News Wall Street Journal. Our national surveys, which we do with a Republican polling firm, show that the wrong track was in the 70% range. That when asked, do you want to elect a president who will make major changes, even if you don't quite know what those changes might be, or would you like to elect someone who will make steady progress? By 5-4 in our last poll, the electorate wanted major changes. We asked a question, do you agree or disagree that the social and economic systems of this country are biased against people like me? Toward the end, we were getting 65% of Americans saying basically the system doesn't represent me anymore. So through the same surveys that suggested that Mrs. Clinton had the advantage electorally in the trial heat, you could also see signs of discontent within the electorate. I think one of the things, I'll speak for myself and not necessarily for my Republican colleagues, I think one of the things we are really trying to reckon with is I do believe there are some things polls got right, and I think one of the things polls got right is I do think Donald Trump was the most unpopular person to run for president as a major party nominee. I believe that's true. Exit polls will show that a lot of Trump voters voted for him, not because they were voting for him, but were voting against somebody. But that's the thing, is how could someone with numbers and negatives, in our NBC Wall Street Journal polling, his negatives were 58, 59, 60. Those are tremendous negatives. The fact that he could win despite that is something I think we're still trying to figure out. You want to give the Trump campaign and Donald Trump their due. This was not just people voting against something. There was clearly something that they might have been voting for, but I think that is one of the things we're trying to figure out. And look, the other interesting thing about this election is there are some states where it's not clear that there was this so-called Trump phenomenon. The state of California, Nevada, where we picked up a US Senate seat and 2 congressional seats, my home state of Maryland. In Maryland in 2016, Chris Van Hollen won that Senate seat by 25 points. There are areas in Maryland where a lot of blue-collar voters live, for example, Baltimore County. Baltimore County in the 2014 governor's race voted for the Republican candidate for governor by 20 points. So if I was thinking, if there's a Trump phenomenon nationally, you might see it in a place like Baltimore County, which voted for the Republican candidate for governor by 20 points in 2014. Well, a month ago, Baltimore County, that same place that voted for the Republican candidate for governor by 20 points, voted for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump by 17 points in the presidential election. So as pundits, as analysts, as people who are interested in politics, you want to see uniformity, or you want to see a trend. I do think it's one thing to look at the numbers nationally, but you really do need to look at individual localities, really have to be that granular, because again, there is not a uniform, I believe, trend as to what happened on November. One of the things I do think that is something to look for is what a lot of the analysts and pundits have noticed since November is the increased or higher turnout in small town, rural America, the exurbs, in essence, red America getting redder. And I do think, again, bearing in mind what I said a second ago, that we need to be careful about applying a uniform theory to the entire country, but there are parts of the country where areas that Romney, McCain, other Republicans did well, Trump did even better, and turnout in those areas were, if not the same as 2012, maybe a little higher. And one of the areas like that that just comes to mind to me, and I think I'll close by saying this really, to me, speaks to what happened to Democrats in 2016, is Elliott County, Kentucky. Elliott County, Kentucky is in eastern Kentucky, number one. Elliott County, Kentucky is very Democratic. There is party registration in Kentucky. Some states don't have party registration. In Elliott County, Kentucky, for every 1 Republican, there are 10.5 Democrats. Third fact, Elliott County, Kentucky had voted for every Democratic candidate for president from 1868 to 2012. So every single election, presidential election, Elliott County, Kentucky had voted for the Democratic candidate for president. In 2008, Barack Obama defeated John McCain in Elliott County, Kentucky, 61 to 39%. In 2012, Barack Obama defeated Mitt Romney in Elliott County, Kentucky, 50-47. In 2016, Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in Elliott County, Kentucky by 70 to 26%. Now, Elliott County, Kentucky has, and that's one of the interesting things about numbers. You give these numbers, and Elliott County, Kentucky feels like Montgomery County, Maryland. There are 4,800 registered voters in Elliott County, Kentucky, so it's a small sample size. But in closing, people ask me in particular as a Democratic strategist, well, what happened in Pennsylvania? What happened in Michigan? What happened in Wisconsin? And I would argue, again, seriously, we're still looking through all the results. But I think the anecdote of Elliott County, Kentucky, and I know this because I studied Pennsylvania in particular, was replicated in the Elliott County, Kentuckys of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And 4,800 votes by itself doesn't sound like a lot, but if there are 30 counties like that, it does make a difference. And what I would argue, again, was a historically close election. And I think one of the things, at least on our side of the aisle, Democrats will look at is not only the lower turnout in some of the urban areas of the country, which obviously hurt Democrats, but also the issue of a place that voted for Barack Obama by 33 points just 8 years ago. What happened to make them turn around and vote for Donald Trump by 44 points 1 month ago? Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions before the reception, and I thought perhaps if you'd like to put a question over, we have students here on the side who can take the questions and bring them to us. I'm going to start by asking you, if I could, Fred, and I also encourage anybody along the same line of questioning. So you said, if I understood you correctly, that that's the analysis that now has to take place. How could a flip like that occur? What are some of the, not necessarily, I don't want to hold you to your own theory about that, but what are some of the competing theories about how a flip like that might have occurred?
Well, I think now, Bob, we're talking specifically about Elliott County, Kentucky?
We're talking about what Elliott County, of places like that, which showed such a dramatic switch from what might have been expected, particularly by those kinds of margins, what might have driven the politics of that kind of electorate.
I think a lot of it, Elliott County, Kentucky is in eastern Kentucky. It's not close to, but it's in the region that borders West Virginia. So I think a lot of this was economic. I think obviously a lot of this was job loss over the last few decades, jobs that hadn't come back. And look, I think there is a famous saying from the 1992 campaign, that's the economy stupid. I do believe that a part of what happened in the Elliott County, Kentuckys of the world was the economy, but that's not the only thing. One of the interesting questions from the national exit polls is the exit pollsters asked the electorate, here are 4 issues, what was the most important issue to you? And then they looked at how people voted who picked those issues. So the top issue in 2016 nationally was the economy. 52% of Americans said the economy is the most important issue in how I decided to vote. Among those people who picked the economy, they voted for Hillary Clinton by 52 to 42. That's a good margin, but if the economy is the #1 issue, you kind of had, obviously since, she did win the popular vote by point, but obviously she needed to win the economy more. We would have hoped that the advantage on the economy would have been greater. They asked another set of questions. Which one of the following characteristics or approaches do you want the next president of the United States to have? The #1 answer, a 39% plurality, so not a majority, but a plurality, said they wanted someone who would bring change to Washington. Among those voters who said the top quality for the next president was bringing change to Washington, they voted for Donald Trump by 83 to 14%. So there were competing variables out there. I really do think issue-wise it was about the economy and jobs, and in particular, job loss. But there was another strain out there that I was referencing at the beginning, that what happened on November 8th, I believe, wasn't just November 8th. It was a culmination of things. Every poll shows this, the historic dissatisfaction with Washington, not just Democrats, not just Republicans, but both parties, the sense that the political and economic system wasn't working for people like them. And look, if I said, and I believe this is true, Donald Trump was the most unpopular person to run for president, he also clearly was one of the most unique people to run for president. And if there's a strain out there of voters, Americans wanting dramatic change, what better way to express that than voting for someone who was as different from anybody else who'd ran for president, regardless of how popular or unpopular he was.
Thank you. We're getting a lot of questions here, so we'll be here until about 10 p.m. I hope that's I know that's not a problem for you, so I appreciate it. So without knowing which particular order to begin with, let's start with this. Assuming that the polls were more or less close, there was an impression that people received through, and this is a broad term, obviously, the media, that Secretary Clinton was on the road to a certain victory by whatever margin one might imagine. Is there an issue, a concern that you have and other pollsters would have about how polling data is communicated to the public?
Well, that's a great question. And since I've been relieved of my duties as unofficial statistician to the middle school team, I have a lot of time to think about this. No, I mean, look, I think this is sort of which came first, the chicken or the egg. It is true, obviously, that if you are a political analyst, again, of either party, cable, broadcast, print, whatever, you look at a lot of different factors, right, to help you basically understand what's going on and look ahead to what will happen. And polling clearly plays a role in that. I think, look, the 10 national polls I looked at to come up with this, the number 7% average for Johnson Stein, the 5% were undecided. Those 10 national polls I'm referring to, only one had Trump ahead, okay? So if you're a political analyst and you're looking at the preponderance of national polls, if of the last 10 polls that were released, 9 of them show Hillary Clinton ahead, you're going to say Hillary Clinton is probably going to win. Now, I do think, though, and then, there was a one poll that had Trump ahead, but again, I'm not saying rerun the election. I'm not saying let's do a do-over. But that poll that had Trump ahead was actually wrong because Mrs. Clinton did win the popular vote. So look, I think that, I think Bob and everyone, the one critique I would make of polling and those who analyze polls is that when people see a number that's 44-40, to think that 44-40 means 44-40, and not taking into account the undecided, what percent are Johnson Stein getting, the margin of error. I think, look, if you don't, okay, so the other way I'm answering that question is, what if we had no polls? Okay, so don't everyone clap, okay? But if we didn't have any polling, where would that leave us? And look, I think, I'm not as old as I look, but I've been doing this for 30 years. And it's amazing. When I started out with Peter and Jeff 30 years ago, when there was a poll, and remember, I'm the pollster, so please keep this in. I got excited because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a poll in Illinois. Let's look at it. in 2016, there were literally dozens of polls every day. And I do think not treating every poll the same, I think will help. You know, what are the polls with a track record in the various states? Did the polls do likely voters? How long were the polls in the field? Again, I do believe that believe the fact that there was volatility with voters, even to the end, is some of the reason why the polls, quote unquote, missed the election. Most of the major polls stopped polling Saturday, Sunday of the election. And I know that is late. And I know people are thinking, well, Saturday, Sunday, the election was Tuesday. As we know, public opinion can move very quickly. And I don't think it's the only reason why, but I do think the fact that the second Comey letter came out on Friday afternoon, and then there was a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I did think that had some impact in changing. I'll bet you if we polled Tuesday morning, we would have found a slightly different result.
Well, that, as it turns out, that's the next question about the Comey letter. The question here is, how do you see the impact of that letter? And then the questioner says, without gainsaying, what about Trump's strength might account for the outcome? And if I could just append a sort of a friendly amendment here, the second Comey letter was exculpatory. So explain then how you see that potentially working against her over the last 4 days of the election, if in fact that's the letter she most would have wanted to see before the votes were cast.
I think that there are going to be lots of theories about what happened, and some of them may even be true. I think, look here, we did the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. We had Mrs. Clinton ahead by 4 points, if I'm recalling it correctly. As of, we got out of the field Saturday, it was Sunday morning. It looked like she was, the internals, the subgroups. Again, it was a national poll, not a poll of all 50 states. It looked like she didn't have it locked up, but no, it looked like she was headed to win. But even in that poll, she had dropped from our previous poll. And the other thing in polls is not just what are the results now, but what were the results previously. The trend for her was the race was narrowing. But at that point, it was more not that Trump was gaining, but that some of her vote was going to Johnson Stein or undecided. The second Comey letter was exculpatory, but I think, Bob, in campaigns, especially if you are a candidate with strong headwinds, 70% wrong direction, the majority wanting a president who would make major changes. 2/3 or so saying the political system was biased against people like them, sort of conditions that would favor an insurgent candidate. Like, she wasn't the incumbent per se, but she was, and Trump, for a lot of reasons, not just because he was of the out-of-power party, Trump himself, he was the insurgent. So you could see all those things making life difficult for the Clinton campaign. And I would argue, and again, this is something all of us will be thinking about and analyzing in the weeks to come. I do think that second Comey letter sort of put the whole issue back on the public consciousness. And if you kind of think about it, it's kind of like a courtroom. The last argument that voters heard from both sides was email. She didn't do anything wrong, but the email, once again. And for Trump, I think, and again, this is something where people should check the record. I think one of the things I noticed was how someone had seemed to have taken away his Twitter account in the last couple days of the election. I don't think that he commented personally on the second Comey letter, and that instead the narrative for the Trump campaign was he was going to go to Michigan, he was going to Wisconsin, he was going to Pennsylvania, and that was his closing argument. And look, I think that's one theory about what happened. I think there are a couple other theories, and all of those could be equally true. Because again, when you have an election like this, that was a surprise, it's really not one thing you can point to. It's a combination of things. I know that's not a succinct 140-character answer, but I happen to think that's the reality of what happened.
Okay, thank you. Next question, this is about Ellicott County, Kentucky, but I assume it's meant to explore the theme more broadly. How would you estimate the potential role of sexism? The first presidential nominee who's a woman, how did that figure into this enormous reversal of sentiment in that county?
I believe that at some level had to be a factor, but that I don't think it was the number one issue. I think there were a whole lot of strengths and weaknesses that Hillary Clinton brought to the campaign. If her gender had been reversed, would she have what would have happened in Elliott County, Kentucky? Again, I really think that the result probably would have been the same. Because, okay, so you change a gender, but you change the party. You change her experience and resume. Again, all the things that you could see in all the polls, even those that had her ahead, kind of the headwinds she was dealing with, the dissatisfaction with government, the unhappiness with the status quo, voters wanting change. I think that, gender might have been an issue, but then there were other factors that I think were equally, if not more, important.
Thank you. This question, the median income of Trump voters in the exit polls of 23 primaries is $71,000. And rural non-college educated white voters only made up 17% of the electorate. How does that square with the narrative of why Trump won?
Well, I think that those are broad numbers nationally, and I think, again, in some of these battleground states, there were higher proportions of those groups. Plus, look, I think the numbers might have changed a little bit since I paid attention to this, but in the state of Wisconsin, which Mrs. Clinton lost by 11,000 votes, there were roughly 30,000 fewer votes in the city of Milwaukee in 2016 than there was in 2012. So I think the proportion in Wisconsin of that last group, Bob, if it was 17% nationally, I think it was maybe 20, 21% in Wisconsin. You take that, you take the lower turnout in a strong Democratic area like Milwaukee, and all those small things add up to an 11,000 vote defeat. Again, remember, when you have a situation like this in which 104,000 votes out of 12 or 14 million cast in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I don't think it's just one thing you can point to. It's not like 100% of Wisconsinites were rural, non-college educated white voters, but if they were 1 out of 5, lower turnout in urban areas, that adds up again to a narrow defeat.
Thank you. I have two questions here, and they're not, I suppose they're not entirely unrelated, so I'll put them together since we don't want to hold you longer than I think is fair given how we're planning out the day. Do you think the general population shift to urban areas will in the future make it less likely for this kind of result to occur? And related to that is, what about the apparent absence sort of from the predicted or hoped for levels of participation among young people?
Oh, that's, I mean, look, I think one of the disappointments as on the Democratic side of things was how we were hoping and expecting more robust turnout, for example, with millennials, and it just didn't happen. And I guess the thing is, we know they're out there. We know that and we know that when they vote Democratic. Yeah, but one of the challenges of 2016 was they just didn't vote in the numbers that that we had hoped for. Is it a message issue for the Democrats? Was it a candidate issue for the Democrats? Was it organizational or logistic? I don't know. I mean, I think, and again, we talk about a lot of the analysis on national terms because that's where most of the data is available. But I do think, in California, which again, if you look at all the California results, you would not know that Donald Trump had been elected President of the United States. Latino and young people turnout was fairly high. So, look, I think as evident by the press, both parties, but in particular the Democratic Party, is going through a period of self-introspection and analysis. And no, I do think one of the things is we know we have the votes to win elections, especially national elections. What was the miscue in 2016 that we can avoid in 2018 and especially 2020?
Thank you. Question. The exit poll suggests that 30% of Latinos voted for Trump. Do you have confidence that that number is, within the ballpark? It seemed higher relative to predictions about how we would fare in that particular segment of the electorate.
Yeah, I think we're not quite sure yet if the 30% number of Latinos is quite right. But I mean, look, I thought that, I think that they are the growing demographic group in American politics. 30% would seem to be a high number to me, especially given the things he said during the campaign. But look, I do know, for example, I was fortunate enough to work on Catherine Cortez Masto's campaign in Nevada. And I'm pretty sure since Senator Cortez Masto won the Senate race in Nevada and Hillary Clinton won Nevada, that at least in Nevada, he didn't get 30% of Latinos. He didn't do that well in California. Maybe Florida's a different issue. Maybe Texas is a different issue. But 30% would seem high to me. But we really have to look at this state by state.
Okay, then just combining two more and then just one after that. Fred, thank you for hanging in there with us. The question is about whether, in fact, the issue that people have had with polling suggesting, gee, the polling nationally was misleading, whether what we have is a problem with the numbers. I think you've partly answered this question before, with the numbers or with the way the numbers are read. And I suppose your answer to that is interpretation has a lot to do with it.
I'd say both. I mean, look, I think again, the last 10 national polls had a Clinton advantage of plus 3.4%. I think as of a couple days, she was ahead in the national popular vote by about 1.8, 1.9%. That's not that far off. But look, but there was a sense, I think, from the polls and the analysts that it was an election that Mrs. Clinton was very likely to win. Look, if you're a normal human being and you see 9 out of 10 polls saying that she's ahead, you are going to draw the not unobvious conclusion that she's probably going to win the election. And look, I think that, look, I also think, though, the other sort of intangible and I hate to keep going back to this, but good pollster, like a good candidate, stays on message, is I think one of the things as sort of, I think if you hooked all of us up to a lie detector, we would have said, yes, we believe she's going to win, but there are, but it's going to be difficult, and there are things you can see where Donald Trump could win, okay? The headwinds that she was facing. But I think the big sticking point to sort of going over to the other side, which ultimately is where we are now, that he could win, was how unpopular he was. And I think one of the things, I think one of the things we underestimated as analysts, and maybe I should say me and not we, because not to condemn everybody else, is, we also said this too in our analysis, but obviously it's not as provocative as saying he was the most unpopular person to run for president. Mrs. Clinton was the second most unpopular person to run for president. And I think at the end of the day, the analysts probably, well, obviously should have given that more weight. That if really this is sort of a flip of a coin for voters, were there other things in the polling that should have been looked at? Folks, beyond 3.4% ahead, 2 points ahead, all those things, the right direction, wrong track. The fact that a lot of Americans still believe that they hadn't recovered from the recession. Again, the strong majority who said the economic and political systems of this country were biased against them. I think maybe if we had sort of paid more attention to those signs that were plainly in view, but that we were distracted by Donald Trump's not only the most unusual person to run for president, the most unpopular, we could have maybe given a clearer view of what ultimately did happen.
Well, then this is the last one, which is kind of a follow-up. This is, again, combining two. So in responding to the experience, whether it's in structuring turnout or trying to decide, for example, how to compensate for the number of voters who are harder to reach now, the obvious shift from landlines to cell phones, do you think, not necessarily only as a result of this election, but more generally, that there's going to be a move within the polling industry to find some way to adjust for those kinds of issues?
First of all, I know this is the last question. I feel like I need a couch to lie down on. But no, I mean, look, the short answer is yes. And honestly, the polling industry goes through this. Because, as you'll recall, in 2012, it was more that the Republican pollsters had, quote unquote, got the race wrong. And look, even if one side or the other gets it wrong, we're professionals. We don't like it, honestly, if anyone gets it wrong, because our job is to get it right, whether you're Democrat or Republican pollster. And we did do a self-reflection as an industry after that. It wasn't just a Republican thing, it was a polling industry. And no, I think, I know some people may not believe this, but every pollster out there, whether you're Democrat or Republican, we really want to try to get this right. And I think one of the challenges for our industry is when a good poll tries to eliminate bias, and in particular, bias in who's being selected to take the poll. It was a heck of a lot easier in the good old days of 10 or 20 years ago when the predominant communication device of the American public was a landline. It's just obviously gotten a lot more complicated now, and a lot more diverse. And I think, polling still has a role. It's important to know what people think, but I do think, we're not just starting on November 9th. We started 2, 4, 6 years ago. What is going to be the best? And also, let's not forget, folks, the most efficient and effective way to truly get a random sample of people that ensures that someone, if you're talking a national poll, has as much chance of being contacted if they live in Anchorage, Alaska, as if they live in Annapolis, Maryland. In the really good old days, when my mentor and your friend Peter Hart was doing this, I won't embarrass Peter and you by saying how long ago that was, a lot of the polls were done door to door, face to face. And clearly, if you think about trying to reach people, that's probably, quote unquote, the best way of conducting research, because even if you don't have a landline, someone can get you, reach out to you. You got to live somewhere. The issue with that, of course, is it takes, when I look back at our old polls at the firm, and we were considered it was considered state of the art, a typical statewide survey would take 30 days. Because you just, you gotta, if Bob Bauer's not home, I got to schlep 5 blocks over to talk to someone else, and maybe they're not home, and then it's obviously a time-consuming process. Just again, polling needs, number one, polling needs to be accurate. Polling needs to be effective. Polling needs to be efficient. A 30-day field period, or 15 days, or 20 days, just isn't practical, given where we are now in society. And again, we have technology. We had to sound like the line from the $6 Million Man. Anyway, we have the technology. We just have to figure out what this new polling world looks like. Maybe it's a blend of different technologies. Maybe it's something else. But we are all striving to figure out how to do our job better.
Well, Fred, on behalf of everybody here, I mean, you're one of the nation's premier pollsters, and we're really grateful that you could be with us today. Thank you very much.